Well, good morning. I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is a really an important milestone on work that everyone behind me did. When we saw that our bail law was not working, it was creating really a revolving door of criminals on our streets. People came together from law enforcement, from our legislature, to make sure that we change that law. And it's been 6 months since the changes to our bail reform law went into effect. And so we just want to update you that those changes are making a tremendous difference in terms of public safety. I want to thank those who are here with me today, Attorney General Formella, Chief Work of Nashua. I know we're going to hear from Ryan Grogan, who's a victim witness advocate from the Portsmouth Police Department. I've got Commissioner Quinn from the Department of Safety, Colonel Hall, a number of our sheriffs who are here, I believe Sheriff Wright, Sheriff Croft, and as I understand, we may have some county attorneys here too. And I really very much, and a number of our police chiefs, so thank you for your leadership. I know Pat Sullivan, who's the executive director of the police chiefs, are here. They were instrumental in helping us get this done. And I want to thank our legislators who are here very much, because you would have thought this would be easy, but it wasn't easy. And it really took leadership from our legislature to stand up and make this happen. And I know Senator Gannon is here, who was very much a leader in the Senate. I certainly appreciate, we've got Representative Barry here, and he and my office communicated probably on a daily basis on the bail reform issue. And Representative Kesherling, thank you so much for your leadership. So thank you to all the legislators that made this possible, because what we've seen so far after 6 months is that the changes to our bail reform law are working. We asked law enforcement, prosecutors, and corrections officials at every level to check in and let us know, how is this law working? And we are getting very good feedback that dangerous criminals are being held in pretrial detention instead of running free in our communities and causing further harm. In fact, in Coos County alone, we have seen a 50% increase in pretrial detention. Victims are being protected, law enforcement are seeing fewer repeat offenders, and prosecutors are telling us that decisions are being made to protect victims. In fact, one of the things we've heard is that judges are actually citing the new bail law in the pretrial detention proceedings. The law is protecting victims, stopping repeat offenders, and keeping dangerous people who have committed crimes off of our streets. And we're going to work together to make this system even stronger. Right now, working with the Department of Safety and the Commissioner of Safety, I appreciate that, and the Assistant Commissioner, in partnership with our court system, we're implementing a new bail notification system that will allow law enforcement in the field to access up-to-date information about someone's bail status. So you can imagine when a trooper stops someone, what will happen, or a local law enforcement officer, so that they can understand what someone's bail status is right away. It's that kind of collaboration that helps protect communities across New Hampshire. And we have excellent law enforcement officers at every level in this state. I couldn't be prouder of them. And it's the reason that we have the safest state in the nation. But it was critical that we gave them the tools to protect our communities by making the changes to this bail reform law that would stop the revolving door and keep violent criminals off our streets. That's what we're seeing after 6 months. We're going to continue to work together to improve our system and make sure that New Hampshire remains the safest state in the nation. And with that, I would like to introduce Ryan Grogan from the Portsmouth Police Department to share how this new law actually impacted a case that he has been working on. And I want to thank him for his important work as a victim witness advocate. Thank you so much, Ryan. Come forward.
Good morning. Thank you, Governor Ayotte, for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. For many survivors of domestic violence, the justice system can feel like another place where they have to fight just to be heard. Survivors often live within a pattern of power and control, where abuse is not just physical, it can be emotional, financial, and psychological. We know that abuse often follows a cycle of violence, where periods of calm are followed by escalation, harm, and fear. For many victims of domestic violence, the most dangerous time in their lives is when they decide to seek help or when the abuser is arrested. In those moments, safety and accountability matter more than anything. The updates to the New Hampshire bail law in 2025, signed by Governor Ayotte, represent an important step forward in recognizing that reality. These changes help ensure that the safety of victims, especially survivors of domestic violence, is a central consideration when courts determine whether someone accused of a crime should be released. For victim advocates, this matters deeply. Every day, advocates work with survivors who are trying to rebuild their lives, protect their children, and navigate a system that can feel overwhelming. These reforms help survivors get greater peace of mind and allow advocates, law enforcement, and the courts to work together to more effectively prevent future harm. Supporting victims means more than responding after violence occurs. It means creating a system that prioritizes safety from the very beginning. During my time as a victim advocate with the City of Portsmouth, I've heard time and time again from victims that criminal bail protection orders are just a piece of paper. That piece of paper isn't going to stop someone who wants to commit harm. Unfortunately, we've seen that here in New Hampshire, and that has created a push for change across the criminal justice system. I've seen firsthand the effects of the new bail law and its ability to keep a victim safe. In one recent ongoing case, a defendant with no prior criminal history was charged with several serious domestic violence-related offenses, including multiple misdemeanors and a felony for stalking and attempting to gain access to the victim. Upon reviewing the case, we saw many red flags and had serious concerns for the victim's safety. The prosecutor was able to successfully argue that the defendant posed a serious risk to the safety because of the evidence that was obtained that night, including threats of harm and access to weapons. Based off the new bail statute, the court held the defendant on preventive detention with the potential to be released if certain guarantees could be made to keep the victim safe. With the defendant being held, we were able to support the victim and make them feel safe. It allowed for additional time to support and meet the victim and interview the victim, where the victim disclosed additional domestic violence-related incidents that had been going on for many months. Additional misdemeanor and felony domestic and sexual violence-related charges were brought forward following those interviews. Following the new charges, the court ruled to hold the defendant with no possible release pending trial. The defendant tried on multiple occasions, both at the district court and superior court level, to argue for the release, but the new bail statute and the potential for harm to the victim kept the defendant held. In this instance, the new bail statute worked in supporting the victim. It helped keep the victim safe in a very vulnerable time in their life, and it allowed them the opportunity to feel safe, gather their thoughts, and break the cycle of violence they had been experiencing for many months. The bail statute changes have been a positive change in supporting victims. When the justice system takes victims' safety seriously, it sends a powerful message to survivors: you are not alone and your safety matters. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to Chief Rourke.
Thank you. It's now been 1 year since this law was signed and about 6 months since the changes have been in effect. And from a law enforcement perspective, we're seeing a real, meaningful impact. In Nashua, we're seeing more consistent use of preventative detention, especially for individuals who commit new crimes while already out on bail. That's a significant shift, and it's making a difference. We've had cases where individuals facing multiple domestic violence-related charges in different courts are now being held, where previously they likely would have been released again. That's an important change for victim safety. And when I talk to leadership in other departments across Hillsborough County and beyond, I'm hearing the same thing. In Manchester, there are real-world examples of the risks we're dealing with, like a defendant already out on bail for a violent offense who was later charged with falsifying evidence connected to a homicide investigation. Those are exactly the kinds of situations where preventative detention matters. In Derry, officers are seeing the law address a long-standing issue. Repeat offenders who fail to appear in court, violate bail conditions, and continue to pick up new charges. That catch and release cycle is starting to break because courts now have clear authority to detain individuals who show they won't comply. There's also a deterrent effect. When people understand there are real consequences for violating bail, behavior changes. Now I'll be clear. Consistency in how the law is applied remains important. But when it's applied as intended, we're seeing fewer repeat offenses, less strain on officers in the courts, and better protection for the public. In Nashua specifically, one of the most impactful changes has been the ability to hold individuals preventatively who have committed new offenses while out on bail. Even lower level offenses, when repeated by the same individuals, can place a significant burden on the courts, police, prosecutors, public defenders, and support staff. Each new offense requires time and oversight from patrol officers, supervisors, legal staff, and judges, hours that could be avoided if defendants who refuse to follow bail conditions were held. This shift from the automatic presumption of release to one that considers prior noncompliance and severity of crime has improved court efficiency and is believed to reduce recidivism among habitual offenders. For example, a recent domestic assault defendant was held on preventative detention after prosecutors learned at the bail hearing that the individual was waiting trial on 2 other separate domestic violence cases with different victims. Before this reform, the defendant likely would have been released on personal recognizance again and potentially continue to reoffend. On multiple occasions, judges have also remarked to defendants that they had no choice but to hold them under the new law. Many of these were serious offenses, the so-called Big 12, and without the reform, these individuals likely would have been released despite the gravity of the charges. While there's always room for improvement, the law has already had a clear positive impact on public safety here in Nashua. From where we sit in law enforcement, these reforms are making a difference in helping make our communities safer. Thank you.
Good morning. It's been 6 months, as the governor said, since the new bail law was signed, and there's no question that in the past 6 months, a lot of hard work by prosecutors, law enforcement, and county corrections officials in implementing this law have made a big difference in public safety in New Hampshire. We've heard it across the state. We've heard it from prosecutors, we've heard it from law enforcement, we've heard it from county corrections officials. State police, for instance, have told us that this law has made a difference on a number of fronts, but especially in traffic safety cases. We've talked a lot about making our roads safer. Under the new bail law changes, habitual DUI offenders are now much more likely to be held. And it's important to remember that if someone commits a DUI offense, they're dangerous on the roads, and we don't want them going back out on the roads to potentially hurt someone. That's made a big difference. It's made a big difference in traffic safety. Local law enforcement have also told us that these changes have made a huge difference. In Manchester, for instance, we've had individuals who were habitual sex offenders who inexplicably before sometimes were released are now being held, routinely being held. We've heard examples in Derry of individuals who are habitual offenders who are now being held. That's one place where the law now makes a big difference. An individual who commits crimes while on bail is much more likely to be held. So as the governor said, we've ended the revolving door. I think there's still more we can do to improve implementation, but the first 6 months of the new statute have made a huge difference. We've heard from county prosecutors that the law has made a big difference. Again, as the governor mentioned, judges are now actively citing the new statute in bail hearings. And one of the things I think the public doesn't always understand is that when someone's arrested, even for a very serious offense, prosecutors, whether they're at the county attorney's office or especially police prosecutors, often only have hours, maybe up to a day and a half at most, to prepare for a bail argument. So the changes that have been implemented with the new bail law, changing the standard from clear and convincing evidence to probable cause, making it much more easy to hold offenders who have committed a crime on bail, making it much easier to hold offenders who have committed repeated offenses, it makes a huge difference. It gives prosecutors much better tools in their toolbox to make sure that we're protecting public safety and we're making sure offenders are held. And we've heard from county corrections that this law has made a big difference. And there are two important things that I want to emphasize. One is that the pretrial detention numbers are up. The governor mentioned Coos County And we've heard in Merrimack County that there's nearly a 30% increase in their in their House of Corrections population, which I think reflects a significant increase in pretrial detentions. So we've heard that the law is working on that front, and we have also heard from county corrections officials that this is manageable. They're not being overwhelmed. Their resources are not being overwhelmed. So we are protecting public safety. The law is working. We're increasing pretrial detentions, and county corrections officials are working hard to ensure that this is managed and that the system is working and that the system continues to function well and at a high level. The governor also mentioned one of the most important things we're here to talk about this morning, which is the new bail notification system. A really important part of implementing this new statute and making sure we protect public safety in New Hampshire is information exchange, making sure everyone has the information they need to protect the public. So the Department of Safety and the court system have been working very hard to put this new system together. We expect that it will be online late May, early June, so it is nearly ready, and it is going to make a very important change in how we share information regarding bail orders. When the new system goes online, any bail order will be entered the same day that it's issued. That doesn't happen now. It will happen when this new system is online. And from that moment, law enforcement and prosecutors who work with law enforcement will be able to run a spots check and get information about any bail orders that are active for any individual or any offender. They'll be armed with that individual's bail status and all bail conditions, and that will include protective orders, no contact provisions, firearm restrictions, anything that flows from that bail order. This is, I think, a very important new development and a very important tool that will be available to law enforcement and prosecutors. Again, I want to thank the Department of Safety and the courts and everyone who's worked on this system because it's going to make a big difference for all of us. Just in closing, I want to emphasize that we can change statutes, we can change the law, and I'm very grateful to the governor. I think I say that on behalf of the entire law enforcement community. Very grateful to the governor and all of the legislators who worked on making these changes that have now been in effect for 6 months. But I'm also very grateful to law enforcement, to prosecutors, to the county corrections officials who have worked really hard to implement this new law. We've seen real unity of purpose. We've seen great teamwork. We've seen great focus in making sure this law works as intended. And the numbers and the feedback from law enforcement and prosecutors and county corrections officials back up the conclusion that this law is working and it's making a difference in enabling us to better protect the people of New Hampshire. So I want to thank everyone who's been instrumental in implementing the new law. And with that, I'll turn it back to the governor.
I think that's what we have for the program, right? So any questions people have?
I have a question for the AG. It's just, I know it's only 6 months, but is there any data about crime rates, or anyone else here might have any information? And are you seeing any trends that the broken windows impact that we've seen in the past might be starting to take effect here?
I think we have some good data on the fact that the law, as I said, the law is working. So pretrial detentions are up, offenders are being held. I think it's too early to say that we have data that shows any change in the overall crime rate in New Hampshire, but it's not just about lowering the crime rate, right? It's about protecting people after crimes have occurred, and that's what we're doing now. I imagine that this will end up providing a pretty strong deterrent, and we'll start to see those trends go down. But I think it's too early, I think, to talk about overall crime rate data. But keeping dangerous offenders off the streets, that is the purpose of this law, and we have the data to show that the law is accomplishing that.
I have a question about fiscal impacts particularly to counties.
Yep.
Is it what you guys anticipated, you talked about the increase in the correctional volume. Is that something that's downshifting to the county's more financial burden? And was that anticipated, and would there be a need to change that?
Well, we certainly anticipated and hoped that the law would result in more pretrial detentions, right, and higher populations in the county houses of corrections. It's important to remember that until 2017, the system worked the way we think it's working now. Many more people were being held, and houses of corrections were always able to handle that population. What we had seen from 2017 to 2025 is that they had a lot less people than they had been built for, than they had really been intended for. So I don't think we have any information that would tell us that there's a budget problem with houses of corrections. And if there were, I'm sure we would work to address that. But I think the system is working well. And from all the information we have, the counties and the houses of corrections are able to handle the increased population, which is what we intended and which is the whole purpose of the law, to keep people safe.
And to just follow up, Marisol Fuentes died in July of last year. Can you tell me how this, if it was in place, would have protected her?
I've listened and read transcripts from the various proceedings that involved bail in the Marisol Fuentes case, and I can never, for one, as we said over and over again, that was a tragic case, and it stays with all of us, and it hasn't. While we never want something like that to happen, it's inspired a lot of great work that has changed the system. So Marisol has had a pretty incredible legacy and an impact on New Hampshire because of that work. As to whether this law would have made a difference, I can never guarantee what a judge's or a magistrate, which they no longer exist, but what a magistrate's decision would have been. You can never guarantee what decision you're going to get from a judge. But having listened to those proceedings, I do believe that had the standard been probable cause to determine dangerousness and not clear and convincing evidence, had there been more of a focus on protecting public safety, had we been focused more on that, which this law I think has both changed the law and accomplished, but also changed the perspective. I think that Michael Gleason would have been held, and I don't think Marisol Fuentes would have been killed.
Governor, do you mind speaking to the aspect of, that we talk about with data with crime rates, that may not be a perfect metric, because in some cases, I know I talked to people in Manchester who said they just stopped calling the police in many instances for low-level offenses because they felt that this person would just be right back out in their neighborhood, potentially terrorizing them again.
Yes, so there is an overall deterrent effect when you know that when someone commits a crime that they're not going to be able to immediately get back out on the street and then harm the victim again. So that is really important. We've heard about that impact. You heard, obviously, from the victim witness advocate speak to how the impact of this law on victims. So absolutely, we're ranked the safest state in the nation. But this is an area where we just heard so many cases about people who had been on our streets and then reoffended and harmed someone else. So when people understand and victims understand that the system is going to hold dangerous people, and that if they report, for example, a domestic violence crime, that they will actually be protected and not be re-victimized while that person is pending trial, then it encourages more people to come forward, right? Because a lot of victims are in fear. And just knowing that the system will protect them if they come forward and tell what happened. Ryan talked about the victim, certainly in a domestic violence case. That's very common in domestic violence cases. But in all cases, people have to have confidence in the system that they will be protected, because it takes a lot of courage to come forward as a victim, especially if you're a victim of domestic or sexual violence.
So you're celebrating a victory with the legislature on this bill. You've got the DUI reform bill coming. I see Representative Barry is here. Do you think you'll get him and his friends on board to get that passed and have a press conference like this in 6 months?
Listen, I think that certainly Representative Barry's been someone we've worked a lot with on these issues, as well as Senator Gannon, who is championing that bill from the Senate. And the time is now for that bill. I appreciate the House and the Senate did the right thing on this bill, and I would hope they would do the right thing when it comes to making sure that the penalties, certainly as we look at the license suspension piece for the breath alcohol tests, that we aren't creating a situation where there's an incentive to refuse. And that's what we have now. We have one of the highest refusal rates in the nation. So again, the legislators that are here, we've worked really well together. The evidence is very clear on this, that we should do the right thing to protect people on our roads from intoxicated drivers. So I'm hopeful that Thursday we'll see another important measure to protect the public.
Governor,
One more.
But is 9 months enough of a deterrent, going from 6 months to 9 months like the House wants to do?
Obviously, the initial bill wanted to double the time, but the 9 months will be a significant improvement, because right now, there really is no difference between refusing the test or taking the test. And the word is on the streets for that, right? Go look at if you want to take a moment, go look at the websites of the lawyers that defend these kinds of cases, and you will see what they say on those websites. Basically, refuse to take the test because, there's no really reason not to. Increasing it to 9 months is a significant step forward to make sure that there is a longer license suspension if you refuse to take the test. And by the way, I think it's really important to point out that if you're not intoxicated, why wouldn't you take the test, right? And I remember, Beth, who lost her son at our press conference, talking about this, and I thought she made such a good point with that, right? And so all we want is people to be on our roads safely. Don't drive when you're intoxicated. And nowadays, there's many ways you can get home, whether it's a ride service or call a friend or stay there, whatever you do, just please don't drive intoxicated on our roads.
Governor, just one last one on bail for you.
Yes.
The arc of this discussion over 8 years, right? What is the lesson for policymakers in the future when the next great idea comes along that essentially, limits law enforcement or something like that? What is the lesson looking into the future of what happens when things like this pass like they did in 2018?
Well, when I look at the lesson of the reforms, that so-called reforms that were made to bail back in 2017 and 18, the lesson is this. Sometimes there's a lot of national movements on issues that don't fit New Hampshire. And we're the safest state in the nation because we have excellent law enforcement, we have strong laws, we have people that work together, but we don't have to follow every national idea that comes here. We should make sure that we do things the New Hampshire way and to protect people. It wasn't an accident we were ranked the safest state in the nation. Why would we change a system that was working? So I think that's the lesson to be learned here, is before you make changes, especially to important areas of the criminal justice law, that you don't precipitously do that you make sure that we're really there focused on protecting the public. It's clear with what happened with these bail changes that it caused a revolving door. I'm so glad that the legislature worked with me and others in this room, the law enforcement, that we were able to fix that. So in the future, let's not fix it, let's just keep it if it's working. Thank you.